Hello and welcome to One Trek Mind. I'm Michael.
And I'm Raptor.
And today we're going to be discussing Star Trek films and why I personally don't think they translate very well to that medium. Star Trek as a whole, I love very, very much, and I have enjoyed many of the movies, but I do still feel like the shows are more at the heart of what makes Star Trek work. The episodic or even sometimes serialized television shows, I think, lend themselves much better to the type of storytelling for Star Trek, and we can discuss why.
Yes, but I think it would be a good position to start to actually look at the lifetime sort of figures, the incomes of these movies, because according to where are my box office mojo, the top 3 highest grossing are the new Trek films. Those would be the ones made by Abrams, that being Star Trek 2009 with a lifetime gross of about 260 million, Star Trek Into Darkness, which got to just under 230 million, and then Star Trek Beyond, which got to about 160 million.
Figure-wise, those aren't bad numbers, to be sure, but they're also not great. Even for the highest grossing, again, it's slightly unfair to pit it up against some of the larger IPs out there in the world. But again, you compare that to a Marvel movie, and there's a bunch of them that have hit $1 billion. You compare that to Jurassic World, a bunch of those. I think all of them have hit $1 billion. Jurassic Park, I believe, did better than those figures, even back in 1993.
It gets even worse, because having just had a quick look, the production budget for Star Trek 2009 was 150 million, and Star Trek Into Darkness's budget was 190 million.
Yeah, and typically to a producer, or to anyone in Hollywood really, you want to at the least double the amount of profits compared to the budget, because a lot of times, even with that budget posted, that doesn't always include the marketing budget, which can be just as much. Sometimes it does, and it could be the case for these. But bottom line is, Star Trek films commercially have never done exceptionally well. They've never really hit the mainstream audience the way they would really like them to. The way I would like them to.
I mean, it's telling that Star Trek First Contact, which is widely considered, I think, the best of the movies, made just over 90 million on a production budget of 45 million. So, out of the top 5, that's the only one that hits that double the production costs.
Well, no, I mean double, as in if your budget was 45 million, you need to make more than 100 million. You need to make...
I see.
Essentially, you need to make over twice that figure. So I guess that would be about 100 million, so they're just shy of it. Well, I mean, if it's 45, that would be pretty much exactly double. So yeah, I suppose that does count then. That hits the figure just barely.
I think going based off figures, although a good place to start is somewhat also a bit of a red herring, because a lot of these movies are coming out at the times of other big franchises.
Yes, but that's also the fault of Paramount for choosing to release them alongside these as competition rather than choosing a better date.
I mean, Star Trek Nemesis is the lowest grossing, which came out in 2002, and I believe it came out in the same year as Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and that. Isn't it 2002?
If it's 2002, then yeah, it was going up against the second Lord of the Rings, the second Harry Potter, and I'm sure there were more than that. I remember looking up something about that year's films that came out, and it was a lot of heavy hitters that it was going up against.
Yeah, Die Another Day came out that year as well.
What month did Nemesis come out?
Star Trek Nemesis came out in December.
Okay, so that was directly in competition of the Chamber of Secrets and the Two Towers for Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, which...
And Star Wars Episode 2.
Oh yeah, that was a bad bad decision for them
was
to
a
have
bad-
released it then.
That was a bad year to release a Star Trek film.
They should have waited till maybe March. It's kind of a graveyard of movies where not a lot of studios will want to release in that window. But since you're going up against such heavy hitters, I think it would have benefited them to have some space away from particularly Star Wars, the direct competition for Star Trek. Let people have a little bit of time to get that out of their system and then put your movie out for release. Because again, going up against Attack of the Clones and Chamber of Secrets and Two Towers, I saw all of 3 of those movies in theaters because I really, really wanted to, and that was something that was on the huge hype train. There were tons of marketing and promotional material for all those things, and I don't have a single memory of seeing a trailer for Nemesis at that time. There's a very good chance that I could have, and I just don't remember because, again, I wasn't into Star Trek at the time. But I think it's telling that I remember every TV spot, promo, trailer that came out for all 3 of the other films, and this was before the internet was a huge thing, and nothing for Nemesis at all. And considering that's the final movie in that saga of Star Trek films, that's not a great look.
It's funny that the only time I ever saw the trailers for Nemesis was on the special features of the DVD version of Star Trek Nemesis that I had. It's the only time I ever saw the TV spots and the trailers. I never saw them at any other point in time.
I'm trying to think what would be a good release for Star Trek movies. I suppose the summer release is the best way to go, seeing as the Abrams movies are the strongest grossing. But again, they're still not super impressive with the amount that they gross, even though they are much more bombastic and action-packed and everything, which is, the audience that they're trying to go for. They want to pull in more people who want to be thrilled by an action sci-fi adventure, and they're still not pulling that many people in with those, so I'm not sure.
I think there's a problem with Star Trek in that even though Abrams made this great attempt to twist Star Trek into something more akin to Star Wars, that doesn't discount the fact that for 40, 50 years, culturally, Star Trek has built up its image and reputation as being diametrically opposed to Star Wars in a way. That 50 years of Star Trek is slower paced and is more philosophical and a soap opera in space and all that other stuff. It's all very well and good getting Abrams to stand there and go, no, we're completely remaking Star Trek and we're going to make it more action focused and bombastic and blah blah blah.
Cool.
You're still kind of fighting up against that reputation.
It's an uphill battle.
Yeah, and all you're doing then is you're going to be pissing off the fans of Star Trek who like Star Trek as it is. And the fans of stuff like Star Wars that don't like Star Trek probably aren't going to give it a chance anyway, because
True.
They don't like Star Trek. They prefer Star Wars. Especially that I don't think it was helped that the Abrams films are not fantastic either.
To be fair, there are a lot of Star Trek fans that I have seen who did enjoy the new direction. They appreciated the fact that it was trying something new, that it was going against the grain of previous Star Trek. And in some ways, I agree, because I don't want any franchise to get stale and just be the same thing rehashed over and over and over again. And I do think the original series movies were very much just sticking to the Star Trek norm, just doing the normal thing. The next gen movies mostly were, but did start to delve into the more actiony kind of territory, but still not going full in on that. So I don't hate that Abrams decided we're gonna try something very different here to try and pull in more of an audience. And to be fair, it is the first bit of Star Trek I ever consumed. because it was the first trailer for anything Star Trek I saw, and I was like, wait a second, that looks kind of cool. I think I'm going to go see that. And without having seen the other Star Trek, I did enjoy it. On rewatches, it does not hold up consistently, even without the Star Trek knowledge. Just as a person who values the logic of the plot, those movies are not good. They don't make any sense for the most part. There's a lot of head-scratching moments throughout those films that I think do kind of overall ruin it. But I think that's mostly an Abrams problem. He does that with a lot of his movies. Even the ones that I've liked, he very much wants to do something cool without explaining how that makes any sense. Even going back to the original series movies, I still don't think the transition to film really works. There are movies in here that I enjoyed a lot. I am one of the few people in the world, apparently, who does like Star Trek the motion picture. I appreciate how artistic it is and how much it has to say. I also really enjoyed The Wrath of Khan, not nearly as much as other people, but I did really enjoy it. And I really, really like The Undiscovered Country. That's probably my favorite of the original series films, which is kind of nice that it ended on a high note for me. For the longest time, I thought The Final Frontier was the final film for them, and I hated that movie. I thought it was really, really stupid.
I mean, there is that saying in the Trekkie fandom that the odd-numbered Star Trek films are the worst and the even-numbered ones are the best. I don't think that applies for all of them, but it does, I think, apply for a lot of them.
I still don't like The Voyage Home. People can come at me in the comments for it. I don't care. I think The Voyage Home is
you know
a
something
stupid
fun?
movie.
So after the Abrams films, that's the next highest grossing.
Really? The Voyage Home?
Yep.
The one about
It's
the
above,
whales needing to speak to a space probe?
It's above First Contact, it's above The Wrath of Khan, it's above all of the rest.
I just don't like the movie. I appreciate how fun the movie is. Like doing a little time travel, fish out of water comedy special, basically, was very fun. But again, because I am someone who focuses on the logic of the plot, the whales needing to speak to the probe does not make any sense to me. Specifically because the movie at no point during it, or in any show that followed, ever explained why. Like, why do the whales have some sort of connection to these aliens? How are they able to communicate and no one else is? What is the reason? And they never tell you. They're like, that's not the point. The point is to save the whales so that they can save us. And I get that, but I need more. It doesn't make any sense to me, and it prevents me from enjoying the film because I don't get it.
I think one of the other problems with a lot of the Star Trek films is that they have always resorted to sort of galactic or really hardcore serious sort of problems, and usually that sometimes ends up with sort of a villainous figure having some super weapon, whether it's Khan having the Genesis device or
and it's superpowered himself,
Shinzon with his super starship, or
V'ger
even
being some giant space entity with limitless power, the probe having limitless power to destroy Earth.
And the problem with that is I think Star Trek has always been its best when it's dealing with an ethical or a sociological or a philosophical or a mystery, which I don't think necessarily translates very well to films.
I think it does. Like there are plenty of murder mysteries out there that people love to watch, like Knives Out.
Okay, but if you ignore like murder mysteries, which, like, if you get rid of the murder part of the murder mystery,
well, why not do a murder mystery for Star Trek? I think that would make a great movie. There's a murder mystery as to, who killed this admiral, what's going on, what is the larger plot at stake here. Like that could make a great Star Trek movie, I think.
That could have been interesting for Nemesis. Do like a murder mystery of who killed the Romulan Praetor.
It could have been very interesting. But I don't think they've ever done that for any of the movies. I think the closest you get is maybe Into Darkness, because that does
or
start
Undiscovered
with...
Country, which starts with an assassination.
True. Undiscovered Country did very well in that regard, I think, and Into Darkness did not. But in both cases, it begins with an assassination attempt, then followed by the crew of the Enterprise having to investigate, figure out what's going on, and try to resolve the issue. The only difference between those two being Undiscovered Country goes heavy on the diplomacy side of things. How can we make relations between us and the Klingons better and resolve the issue, not go to war or anything? Whereas Into Darkness just kind of exploded into violence against Khan and the Section 31 ship and all that.
Which is again also...
just got too crazy in that movie for me. Like, it got pretty insane.
Another reason why I think Star Trek films don't really work very well on the big screen is because even when they get quite action heavy, it's still a relatively sort of small scale. I mean, Star Trek has never really been about hardcore action. Even Deep Space Nine and Enterprise, when they pushed the action bit, it was only the occasional episode or the occasional scene, and then it went back to all being sort of small scale, the occasional firefight in a room or a corridor, and that's about it.
The Xindi arc, I think, leaned pretty heavy into action. There were almost 4 episodes in a row where it was just non-stop, space battles, shootouts, high stakes tension, world-ending threat stuff, and it worked really well in that regard.
But did it work well because it was fresh, because it had worked up so long to get to that, position?
I can't be sure, because again, I don't think action itself is the problem. A lot of people dislike Discovery, and I dislike it in many ways myself, but the opening 2 episodes, which are very heavy on the spectacle and action, I didn't dislike. I actually thought it was a pretty fair start to the show, and then I think it went downhill from there, but it wasn't the action that I took issue with. It does make me wonder why it feels so strange in the films, because on one hand, yes, I do think the movies have a problem, and some of the shows now as well, with world-ending, galaxy-ending, universal-ending threats, just constantly ramping up the level of stakes that you have. But that's also a problem with the medium of film and movies. If you're gonna put a known IP into movie theaters, there has to be a reason for it. It doesn't really make sense to put a quiet, philosophical, more low-budget product into a movie theater, because why are you doing it in a movie theater then? Just put it on TV like you have, where it works.
Well, obviously the story behind that is, back in the day, Star Wars' success was such a big thing that Paramount wanted in on that, essentially. That was the result of, the slow motion picture came around simply because Star Wars had been such a massive success.
Well, that's what I'm saying though, that's the problem with film. It's made to be big. It's made to be much bigger and exciting and higher budget than TV. So I don't think you can put a movie into theaters without it having those aspects. Because if you don't, people again are going to be questioning like crazy, why is this a movie? As they did with the motion picture, because it was a very slow-paced, basically just a long episode of Star Trek put into a movie theater, and people constantly went, why is this here? I came to the movie theater expecting some spectacle and something more exciting, and I didn't get it. And they did start doing that with the movies pretty much from that point onward, I would say. Or maybe not from that point onward, because The Search for Spock and Voyage Home weren't super high spectacle, insanity type movies. But The Wrath of Khan was 100% an action movie, like a revenge action movie. And it is still to this day known by many as the best Star Trek film. I don't think so. But
I don't think so.
I think it was good.
I prefer First Contact to The Wrath of Khan, but I really like the fight at the end of The Wrath of Khan, where they're stuck in the nebula and basically Kirk outsmarts Khan.
Which I have argued. I don't know if I buy it. I'm like, Khan has superhuman intelligence, and Kirk, you bang every lady you see. I don't 100% believe that you would be able to outsmart him. I'm not saying Kirk is not smart. He's had many moments proving his intelligence. But to outsmart Khan, I don't know. Maybe. I guess.
I mean, I feel that the Borg Queen is the better villainous character. Even though there is the argument about whether the Borg needed a Borg Queen or not, I think she is a really strong villainous character, which kind of, ignoring that argument altogether, she made that movie.
Yeah, like I take some issue with the Borg having a leader. I do agree with the criticisms that it lessens the fear you might have of the Borg, because again, now it's not an entire collective where destroying millions of them still does nothing, because there's still billions more. Now, if you defeat the one person in charge of it all, you win. And it does make it less threatening, I think. But she played that character so well, and was just a joy to see on screen, kind of doing her thing, to the point where whenever she showed up again in Voyager, or even more recently in Picard, I got excited. I was like, oh, it's the Borg Queen. Like, she's full of... I'm
sass.
trying to think of how to describe... It's not even sass, it's like sex. Like, she just oozes sex appeal in a really terrifying but fun way. It's hard to describe. Like, I'm not turned on by her, but she has a way about her that makes me want to watch.
I would say she's definitely also sassy in a lot of her encounters with Janeway. Just...
True.
She's so they're so bitchy towards each other, to be honest.
I do still think Alice Krieger was the best of the Borg Queens, though. The replacement on Voyager did a good job. Like, it was serviceable, but it was nowhere near Alice Krieger.
Do you think the other reason why Star Trek films fail, in inverted commas, is because are they being put on a pedestal in comparison to other big franchises like Star Wars that they could never ever match? And as a result, maybe that's the reason why they're always, they're considered the failures, but maybe we shouldn't be putting them on the same sort of level as those big franchises in the first place, and maybe they should be more niche movies or indie movies, for want of a better term.
I think 100% personally. Whenever you put any movie out there, even if it's not part of a big franchise nowadays, it's going to be compared to those things, because that's what most people watch. When most people go to the movie theater, it's not to go watch an indie movie or to see a rom-com or this or that. Like, those movies exist and they do well in their particular space, but they'll never do as well as Harry Potter, The Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Marvel movies. Those have a built-in enormous general audience that want to see action and spectacle, and hopefully get a good movie as well in the process. Whether they do or don't is entirely dependent on the filmmakers, but people know what they're going in for to a movie theater, and that's usually for enormous spectacle, and that's what you'll get with Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, all these different big giant franchises. And Star Trek has attempted to do the same with the Abrams movies, but it does have such a social stigma on it that it's just not reaching the general audiences like they would like it to. It did a little bit, like it did bring in some new people with those movies, but not nearly as much as I think they were wanting. And I think that ultimately goes to my solution to the whole thing, which is let things exist in the mediums that support them best. Star Wars has really struggled to transition over to television. Or I suppose streaming is the better word for it now. It's not even really television. But they've really, really struggled to take it from the big screen down to the small screen. And I think Star Trek has had the opposite problem of moving from the small screen to the big screen. And I think that it's mostly because those two IPs are not really meant for those other things. Can it be done? Yes, I do believe you can make a Star Trek movie that is very good and potentially commercially really good as well. Same thing as I think you can make a Star Wars TV show that is really good and commercially does well as well. But it's clear that the type of storytelling in each of them does not lend itself super well to those forms of content. Again, Star Trek is much slower. It is much more character and philosophically based, which can make for a great movie, but will it make for a huge commercially successful movie? I don't really think so. Because again, those movies exist today, but they are never as commercially successful as those big action franchises, because that's what people go to the movie theaters to see. Whether we like that or not, like I personally don't, like that general audiences just need to see big explosions like every 30 seconds in order to be entertained. But that's what people mostly go to the movie theaters for. And they mostly watch streaming or television content to get something else. And Star Trek, I think, is something else.
So do you think then that future Star Trek movies would do better if they were straight to streaming services then, in that case?
No, I honestly think they might just be better not making films for Star Trek. Again, I know there's a lot of people who, again, dislike the sameness of a lot of Star Trek, and to a degree, I agree with that. But I think the tried and true formula for Star Trek is a crew on a starship going on episodic adventures. I think that lends itself the best to the tone of Star Trek, to the characters in Star Trek, and to the ideas and concepts that they bring forth. When you try to turn it into a 2.5 hour movie that has lots of spectacle and action, I think you lose a lot of that. And I think to a degree, when you serialize it over the course of a long season, you also will lose some of that. Maybe not necessarily. I have yet to see a serialized Star Trek story that I really, really enjoyed, but I don't think it's impossible. But again, I think for what Star Trek is, it just simply works best as an episodic adventure, where every episode you have some sort of new threat to deal with or a new concept to explore, and some arcs will last an entire season or more surrounding certain characters. But when you try to do a long form story for Star Trek, it almost always falls apart. And again, on the flip side, you have Star Wars trying to do their streaming services, and I feel like them trying to take a more episodic approach or long serialized approach is just not really working for them either, because you're removing a lot of the spectacle and action that people are looking for in that franchise and replacing it instead with character beats, and in a lot of cases with characters that people don't really care about. So
it's interesting that as a long-term Star Trek fan, I've never had the idea that Star Trek has to be on the big screen. Like, I don't think I would care that much if the Star Trek movies ceased to exist. Like, if tomorrow they all just disappeared, I don't think the franchise would be worse off without them. The Star Trek movies are so very radically different to the episodes that in a way they're two almost completely separate things. You could almost name them something totally different and it would be a film series in its own. In the same way that, like, when Star Wars started doing stuff for streaming, I was like, oh, okay, this is a bit weird. Even though I really liked the first half of The Mandalorian when it first came on streaming, and then I very quickly I went off because, again, it was trying to do a long serialized storyline, which I just didn't find very interesting after a while.
I mean, again, considering that streaming services have the budgets that they do now, like, we don't do 26 episode seasons anymore. We do 10 to 13 episode seasons where you have a lot more budget per episode. So you can do the big spectacle and high budget and all this kind of stuff in your streaming services now. I agree, I don't think you need Star Trek films to be out in theaters. I think it's going to ultimately reach less of an audience in that way, because people still have a bad stigma on Star Trek. They're like, I'm just not going to go watch that. I'm not going to go leave my house, drive down to the movie theater, pay for a ticket to go see this new Star Trek thing that I don't care about. If they have the streaming service that Star Trek is on and they see an episode, I think it's much more likely that they're going to sit down and watch an episode than go out of their way to the movie theater and watch the film.
I mean, I almost think that, thinking beyond the fact that cinemas are actually kind of having problems at the moment, they're closing down, people aren't coming to the movies as much as they used to. I actually kind of think that is something cinemas should consider, is to put episodes of things on the big screen. I would love to go and watch some of the DS9 episodes or some of the Voyager episodes, those big two-parters on the big screen.
Well, they have. Again, the latest season of Ahsoka, they put the 5th episode in theaters for people to watch. And they do that pretty frequently, actually. Like, if a show is very popular, they will put those in theaters. House of the Dragon, well, they certainly do it in the US. I'm pretty sure it's not just the US either. Because House of the Dragon was insanely popular. They put some of those episodes in theaters, which I would have loved to have seen on the big screen. That would have been cool. It's not like it's not done. It's just, again, especially after COVID, people don't want to leave their house to go and watch something at a movie theater. I think within the next 20 years, movie theaters aren't going to be a thing anymore, which saddens me, and it does make me nervous as to where content is going to go, because they're going to get their money somehow, and if they can't get it out of movie theaters anymore, then that just means they're going to jack up the prices of streaming services an insane amount so that they can put their content there, which again makes me very nervous. But people don't want to go to the movie theaters anymore, and I think that is a problem for movies as a whole. And in the case of Star Trek, I just don't see any future films from them doing extremely well. I know they're discussing a Star Trek Picard movie, which I absolutely don't want in any way, shape, or form.
I would not be interested in going to watch that, solely just because I don't think it's the 3 seasons of Star Trek Picard that we got. I don't think demonstrated to me that there was much left to get out of that particular crew. Like,
I mean, they've
Voyager
had their ending
and Deep
twice
Space
now.
Nine. Yeah, the next gen
3
cast
times.
had their films and had their ending. The DS9 crew and the Voyager crew and the Enterprise crew, and in terms of the Enterprise crew, definitely deserve more of an ending than the one that they got.
I personally think, as much as I would be okay with a movie for DS9 to see, how things shook out in the end for all those characters, or for Voyager, or for Enterprise, I don't want any of those. I want something new. I want a new crew and a new set of characters that are unrelated to what has come before. That's one thing that I dislike about Strange New Worlds, is even though I like the show quite a bit, it's still based in a time period that we've already seen, with characters that we've already seen, some new, which are great, but a fair amount of them that are existing characters already. I would like for them to do what they did with Next Gen, where you go to a different era with characters that are entirely unrelated to previous characters. They're just new characters for you to get to know, and do something new with it. I'm very worried that the franchise is going to continue to become stale because they just can't seem to get away from either nostalgia or just redoing over and over again what has worked. Which is one reason why I'm not opposed to more films or serialized storytelling in Star Trek, because yes, I want to see something new. But the serialized content I've seen and the movies that I've seen don't inspire much confidence in me that Star Trek works outside of the episodic style content. So I would suggest give me more episodic content with a new crew, with a new era. Let's do what we did with Next Gen again and explore some new concepts with it. Because the movies themselves, again, I think a lot of them are good, but they just don't they don't feel right to me. It always feels like it's a dramatically different tone to the shows. They always feel like they're trying to be something that they're not. Basically, in direct competition to Star Wars or other sci-fi franchises. And I don't think commercially they really have a choice, because if you took Ad Astra per Aspera, like one of my favorite episodes from Strange New Worlds, if you turned that into a movie and put that on the big screen, I would love that. I think that would make an excellent movie and be something different, but it would not do well. Like, I do not believe there would be people who would buy tickets to go see that. So I just don't really see a future for the films for that reason. I think they're going to just have to continue making really action-y schlop in order to get people to buy tickets. And if that's what they're going to continue to do, it's not something I really want to watch. I like a good action movie as well, but in the right genre, in the right context. Like, again, I love going to see my superhero movies to watch a good action sequence without the plot needing to be very complex or deep or anything. Occasionally it is, but I watch that genre for that reason. I do not watch Star Trek for that reason. So the Abrams movies never landed for me because any depth to them is rushed over very, very quickly to get to the next action set piece. Which, again, to the credit of those movies, it's exciting. Like, a lot of those action moments and the pacing of those movies is, very exciting. It lends itself well to the action genre. I just don't think Star Trek lends itself well to the action genre. And the only other thing I would say is, even with everything I just said there, even the slower Star Trek movies, more often than not, just don't land with me. Maybe it's just I'm not a fan of the writing of those particular films, but there's something about the movie length that just doesn't feel right. Like, The Search for Spock, I did not like that movie. For one, I think the plot is very contrived, bringing back a character who should have died in the former movie to actually have a significant impact. But even then, it's a very slow movie. It's a very methodically paced one with a lot of talking and all the things that I do enjoy in Star Trek. But the concept itself feels very blockbustery to me with, we're going to bring back a character who died like you do in a comic book. And it just didn't work. I just didn't enjoy the movie. And The Voyage Home, even though it's a fun movie and also a little slower paced and more character focused, the actual plot of it being this world-ending probe that needs to speak to whales just threw me, and I did not enjoy it. And The Final Frontier, which is also another more slower paced, not a huge action movie, I did not enjoy because it had extremely thick religious tones that I don't think belong in Star Trek, first of all. And two, it was just so silly. Like, there's so much in that movie that's silly, but not in a good way. It's the kind of stuff that people point at and laugh when they think about Star Trek, which bothered me with that movie. I'm like, you're making their case for them that this is a cheesy, stupid IP. So I wasn't a fan of that movie either. The only slower paced character and philosophical style movie that they've really made, I think, is The Undiscovered Country, where you have the Klingon relations in full display. Because even the next gen movies, I think they're pretty heavily action focused. First Contact has tons of action. You have Picard shooting up Borg with a Tommy gun. You have Nemesis, which has some really good, starship on starship battles and everything. Insurrection, I think, is the slowest of the next gen movies, where it's
definitely
more character based, not as much action.
Definitely more character based.
But I didn't like it that much either, because it's not a bad movie or even like a bad long episode of Next Gen, but it's also not good. It's just very mediocre, it felt to me. It's just, yeah, that happened. Just another little small time adventure that we went on, and in that regard, maybe they should have amped up the action of it all a little bit more. I'm not sure. It's difficult to say exactly what part of this formula is not working for Star Trek films, but to me, something's not working. Kind of no matter what they're attempting.
I would say I think one of the bigger problems, or the other problem I wanted to mention, was that sometimes it seems Star Trek shows and Star Trek films struggle to refer to one another. A lot of these events that occur in the movie don't have very much impact to the shows, or it's very tangential, like Worf coming to Deep Space Nine because the Enterprise gets destroyed by the Duras sisters in Star Trek Generations. Yes, Cisco says, I was sorry to hear about the Enterprise, it was a good ship. But that's it. In the same way that in Star Trek Insurrection, the only reference to the Dominion War is an offhanded line about negotiation. In the same way that Khan only gets tangentially mentioned. Big planet-killing whale probes, however, don't ever get mentioned again. Vija never gets mentioned again. The Genesis device, apart from one episode of Lower Decks, never gets mentioned again.
Lower Decks also mentioned the whales in the probe. And V'ger. Lower Decks mentions everything. Like, if it exists in Star Trek, Lower Decks has talked about it. It's fun. But that's an issue, again, I think, with the film medium. Films really, in my opinion, work best when they are standalone, or at the very least a condensed franchise. Like, The Lord of the Rings are not standalone films, but there's only 3 of them. You only have to watch the movie that came before, or the 2 movies that came before, to be able to go to theaters and enjoy that. And with the Star Trek films and shows,
I don't think you can understand the films without watching the shows. I don't think it's at all possible.
I watched First Contact first without seeing the shows, and I didn't understand a lot of stuff going on. I didn't know who the Borg were. I didn't know what the deal with Data was. I didn't know anything about Mr. Cochrane or a warp engine, or how time travel works and is used in Star Trek. Like, there's a lot of that movie you have to have seen the show for. That's a problem that Marvel is running into right now, with having shows and movies play into each other. Like, you have to watch these shows in order to watch this movie. People don't want to do homework in order to enjoy their content. And if you tell them, okay, but before you watch First Contact, you need to have watched all of Next Gen, they're not going to do that. And it's a problem. It makes it tough, which is, I think, the main reason why Abrams decided to do an alternate timeline. Because he's like, you don't have to watch the shows to watch my movies at all. They are not related. It's a different universe. You can just jump into this film, and that's all you need to know. It makes it difficult for Star Trek, which has existed for 60 years, to be in the film category, because if you make a movie that doesn't talk about anything that happened in the shows or anything that came before, you have us on one side saying, why aren't you referencing this? This is something that happened and is kind of pertinent to this story or these characters, so why is it not being mentioned? But if you do mention it, then you alienate your general audiences who have never seen that and don't know what the hell you're talking about. So again, I just don't think Star Trek can really transition to film in that regard. There's too much homework you have to have done in order to enjoy it now. I think that's even somewhat a problem with the shows, where there is so much content that has happened at this point. A new audience member is going to really struggle to just jump in on something. They're going to be like, what are they referencing here? What are they talking about? What is this concept they are discussing? It's like, oh, well, if you have seen Next Gen or Deep Space Nine, you'd know all about it. But, do you have 3 or 4 weeks worth of content watching to watch all of that? Most people, especially nowadays, do not. So it is an ongoing problem that likely will just get worse as time goes on, because more and more content is going to keep coming out. But it is the big reason I think film just doesn't work for Star Trek. Like, they can try and try and try, and I will probably continue to watch to see if they manage to find the fine line there, but I don't personally see it happening. And again, with all that being said, I still did enjoy many of the Star Trek films. I'm not saying that they're bad movies. Some of them are.
I think, obviously we'll have to do our rating and we'll have to do reviews of them all, retrospectives, but none of the movies are bad. But I suppose when we mean that they don't succeed, is that they don't succeed from the position of, if you're fans of Star Trek, and they don't succeed if you're fans of having lots of money, as Paramount is.
Why I wonder why they're pushing so hard to make more movies. It seems Paramount lately has been discussing nothing but let's make a Picard movie, let's make a Kelvin prequel movie, let's make a Section 31 movie, and I don't understand why they're having such a focus on the movies when I think focusing on their streaming would be a much better commercial outcome for them. Like, if they're going to make a Section 31 movie with Giorgio's, evil Terran counterpart, no one's going to go see that unless they've seen Discovery. And Discovery had a decent audience, but that audience has dwindled over time, which is why they're canceling it. So why do they think that would make a commercially successful movie? And again, Picard would probably be their best bet for a commercially successful movie, just because it'll have Patrick Stewart, and he is a very, very successful actor who does pull in people for tickets. But I don't want that movie because, again, I've already had 3 different endings for Picard and his crew. Once in the Next Generation show, once in Nemesis, and once more in season 3 of Picard. I'm like, I have seen everything you can possibly say about these characters. I don't want another story with them. Another ending. Like, I've had it, dude. I have had it many times now. Movie-wise, the Kelvin prequel's probably the closest one to a movie I actually want to see. But even then, I'm pretty down on Abrams and his Kelvin movies, so I'm not super convinced I would like that either.
Well, let us know down in the comments what you think about the Star Trek films and what reasons you think they don't succeed as movies. Eventually, me and Michael will get round to retrospectively reviewing all of the Star Trek films, so that'll be something to look forward to. And don't forget, if you haven't already done so, please like and subscribe to the new channel to help us grow a bit bigger.
Yes, please and thank you.
But until the next video, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.